Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Isla Barker. On the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by Lloyd Melville MSP for Angus South. Good afternoon, Lloyd.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
And we are also delighted to welcome Scots writer and journalist Emma Grae. Good afternoon, Emma.
Hi there. I'm good, thank you.
To start, we will begin with our Ukraine update. A Russian ballistic missile attack on Kiev early Sunday has wounded at least 2 people, the city's administration said not long after it had warned residents to take shelter. Explosions and several flashes in the sky have been reported. Several fires broke out in the Darnitsky district as a result of the attack, according to reports. The attack follows civilian deaths on both sides of the Russia-Ukraine border on Saturday. Russian strikes on Dnipropetrovsk in central eastern Ukraine and the northern Sumy region killed 2 people, while Ukraine launched attacks on Volgograd and Belgorod in Russia's southwest, and Horlivka in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, which is controlled by Moscow. 3 people were killed in the attacks, regional authorities said. In the Russian border region of Bryansk, a Russian drone strike on Saturday killed 2 people in their car and a village near the border, according to a social media post by the region's acting governor Yegor Kovalchuk. Russia's defense ministry claimed 124 Ukrainian drones had been downed over Russian regions over a period extending from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. A massive Ukrainian drone strike also hit the Krasnodar region in southern Russia, causing a fire in an oil refinery. More than 40 drone strikes and artillery fire had killed 1 person and injured 1 near Nikopol, according to the governor of the southeastern Dnipropetrovsk region in Ukraine, Alexander Ganzev. The town, lying on the opposite bank of the Dnipro River from the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is a frequent Russian target. On Saturday, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić announced he would resign within weeks and the country would hold early presidential and parliamentary elections after 18 months of anti-government protests about government corruption and media censorship. Serbia is a candidate to join the European Union, but it is under pressure from the West to align with EU sanctions on Russia, a step Belgrade has so far declined to take. It must also improve its rule of law, including conditions for fair elections and root out corruption and organized crime. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko held talks on Friday, according to the Kremlin, and discussions were expected to have focused on the war in Ukraine. The meeting follows a warning earlier this month from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to Lukashenko to remove equipment from Belarus used by Russia in its attacks on Ukraine. Now moving on to our Middle East update. 1,040 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the start of the October 2025 ceasefire, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 to 73,051. An independent UN inquiry has found that Israel is committing genocide as it continues to deliberately target Palestinian children in Gaza. Now Trump's so-called Board of Peace is planning to grant itself immunity from prosecution for crimes it may commit in Gaza. And now moving on to to the Starmer resignation. Yes. So, with this Board of Peace having supposed immunity from prosecutions for crimes, what do you think could come of this? We'll start with Emma.
I mean, I think that the Board of Peace should probably be called the Board of America, just because it's another extension of Trump trying to. He's just protecting American interests, really, at any cost. I don't really think there's anything else I could personally say on it.
Okay, thank you. And then, Lloyd, what do you think could come of this Board of Peace that's immune from any crimes?
Well, I think it's important that we don't recognise the legitimacy of this organisation. I mean, it has been set up by the US president really as a kind of ego vehicle for him and some of his pals around the world, most of whom appear to be authoritarian themselves. So I don't think we should recognise the legitimacy of it. Of course, there should be efforts to secure peace internationally. That has to be done through the United Nations and through those proper international bodies. So I'll be watching with interest to see what comes of this. But I think, given the character of the President of the United States, I think it'd be difficult to predict at this stage what could come of it.
Thank you. And then, so do you think that the UK government or even the Scottish government could intervene in some way or do anything to deter this Board of Peace from having an impact, Lloyd?
I certainly think that it's incumbent on the UK government to use what role it does have internationally to try and get the best outcome possible. And that means insisting on an end to hostilities, insisting on an end to the genocide in Gaza. Now, I don't know what influence Keir Starmer will have for the rest of his lame duck period in office. Of course, we're now in this period of transition between Keir Starmer and the inevitable Andy Burnham premiership. But Keir Starmer should be making all of the phone calls he can, applying all of the pressure he can to make sure that these horrible war crimes are brought to an end as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then, Emma, do you think the UK government would be able to do anything to, or the UN, to resist any of this and to condemn the genocide and potentially stop it?
I think the UN arguably has the ability to do something here. With regards to the UK, I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say I'm quite disillusioned with the current government and the incoming new Prime Minister. I don't really think that anything is going to change. I think there's a desperate need for strong leadership that we just don't seem to be getting. Unfortunately, I think we'd need a Prime Minister who was willing to especially speak out against American interests, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
So you don't think Andy Burnham would speak out against Trump and his role in the genocide?
I would be very surprised if he did.
And Lloyd, do you think Andy Burnham would speak out against anything or condemn anything?
I think it's hard to tell at this stage. I mean, he's been something of an invisible man in terms of foreign policy, given his previous role largely as the mayor of Manchester. So I think at the moment it's wait and see, isn't it? Because he hasn't properly outlined a prospectus for office. People are assuming lots of things about Andy Burnham, but he hasn't said very much himself. So again, I'll be watching with interest to see what comes from Andy Burnham, because of course the UK does have a significant international role to play here. And if it chooses not to do so, not to protect the people of Palestine from this ongoing genocide, then of course that will be a continuation of the horrendous policy that we have seen from the UK government to date.
Thank you very much. And moving on to the Starmer resignation. On Monday morning, the lectern appeared on Downing Street, followed by Sir Keir Starmer announcing his resignation. With Andy Burnham expected to become Labour leader, is Al Cairns' briefing that he also put himself forward really a job application to be Defence Secretary? What will a Burnham government look like, and more importantly, what will he stand for? So then, we previously just discussed if Andy Burnham would condemn any US interests and roles in the genocide in Gaza. So then, what else do you think Andy Burnham could stand for, Emma?
I just think the UK is desperate for change, and I think that there's a case to be made right now that there should be a general election rather than another transfer of power, mid government. But I'm aware of what that might mean. So there's no obvious solution, but I think that there's a vast amount of issues that need to be dealt with, especially with the cost of living crisis, which seems to be just dominating the everyday person's life. And I just don't know what the solution is. Obviously, even with the best will in the world, how much power does the Prime Minister have? And then again, how is that going to impact Scotland? Because as we know, Scotland tends to have very different views on certain issues.
Thank you. And then, Lloyd, what do you think Andy Burnham could stand for if he did become Prime Minister?
Well, there is the kind of Andy Burnham of the Manchester mayoralty, which is a person who, from my perspective, seems certainly to be concerned about the way that the Westminster system is set up, and seems to genuinely want to move power from Westminster out to the nations and regions of the UK. Now, whether or not he will continue to stand for that and will continue to then push for that if he gets into office is another thing. But let's not forget that he was a minister in the failed New Labour governments too. I would be surprised if he was a born again Corbynite or something like that. I would be surprised if suddenly he found this kind of progressive tilt that would enable him to satisfy the democratic ambitions of lots of people in Scotland. But we will see. We are in this limbo period. I just wanted to pick up on Al Carnes, though, if I can, because I think it's been interesting to watch some of the manoeuvring, because some of your more obvious leadership contenders like Wes Streeting have recognised that they couldn't win against Burnham, but then you've got these outriders like Al Carnes that are coming through with these 5 tests that he's set out. I have not seen a more transparent "please give me a job" ask in a long time. So I would go as far as to say he's certainly angling for a job in government.
Okay, thank you. And then, Emma, do you have any thoughts on Al Carnes trying to become Defence Secretary or find a foothold in the government?
I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment on this one.
Sure. Okay, and so then, do you think it was right for Keir Starmer to resign as Prime Minister?
Yeah, 100%. He should have done it a while ago, I think. He obviously hung on a lot longer than people thought he would, but I guess I think in his mind he'll be thinking, do I want to join the recent list of prime ministers who have obviously had relatively short stints in office? I don't think he had a choice. I just hope that what happens next leads to some sort of stability in government. But again, this is the 6th time that this has happened, so I really, obviously the hope of that happening is quite slim.
If I can pick up there, I think you're right to say this is the 6th time that we've seen this Westminster chaos. Let's not forget the Labour Party were elected in 2024 on a promise to end the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen since then is not just a continuation, but almost an acceleration of the chaos that we saw under the Tories, with the cost of living skyrocketing, with people's energy bills going up, with the international situation worsening, of course, too. And rather than get to grips with all these big issues, use the power they've got, use the mandate, the significant majority they've got, they've spent this whole time navel gazing and looking at themselves. And actually, when people really want change and want to see action on the cost of living, we're now going to see another period of Westminster chaos. And I think that this will just further the disillusionment that many people feel with the Westminster system. And of course, the answer to that for me and for my party is for Scotland to become an independent country, so that we don't have these decisions made in a dysfunctional Westminster system, and we can take them ourselves.
Thank you. And Emma, going back to what you said earlier, when do you think Keir Starmer should have resigned, since you said he should have resigned a long time ago?
I think in the wake, really, of the Mandelson scandal, when everything about that came out, he should have done it then.
Okay, thank you. And then, so we'll start with Lloyd. So a Labour government led by Andy Burnham, what do you think could happen in terms of any policy changes, not just what they stand for, but how they could execute their values as a party? How do you think that could happen?
Well, it'll be interesting, certainly, because, of course, the Parliamentary Labour Party that he inherits is going to be Keir Starmer's PLP. And Keir Starmer and Labour together exercised a huge amount of control over candidate selection, over policy formation. I believe that he has committed to keeping Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, which of course then leaves him very little room for manoeuvre in terms of fiscal policy. So it may be that we see continuity Starmerism, just with a slightly different face at the helm, and maybe a slightly better communication style. It's impossible to tell at this stage. He is, I believe, also mooted to be considering keeping Shabana Mahmood in the Home Office, which means that the aggressive, hostile immigration policy will not change. And of course, Scotland's demographic challenges mean that we need inward migration to satisfy our public services and also our tax base. So for me, I'm not spectacularly enthused by the prospect of a Burnham premiership. I think that it will just be continuity Starmerism without a tie, maybe, and with a slightly Manchester twist. Maybe that's what people want to see. Maybe it isn't. It certainly doesn't satisfy my democratic ambitions, and certainly when I've been out and about knocking on the doors in not just my own election, but the by-election that we had in Arbroath and Broughty very recently, the enthusiasm for Labour was very, very thin on the ground, and that wasn't just related to Starmer, I should say. They had a historic opportunity to implement real change across these islands, and they have absolutely bottled it.
Thank you. And Emma, do you have any hopes for a potential Burnham government? And do you think he would be able to change the Labour Party in any way?
I would like it if some positive change came. I think that if it's a continuation of what we've seen so far, unfortunately, it is opening the door, especially in England, for a reform government, which is not what anyone, at least certainly not what I want to see, and I don't think what Scotland wants to see. But I think that in times of like severe austerity, political unrest. I mean, we saw it 100 years ago in Germany. It does lead to the rise of more right wing governments because people feel like they have to opt for a more extreme option in order for anything to get done. The Tories didn't give the change that people wanted them to. Labour have obviously done what they've done. Someone described Labour as basically the Tories in a trench coat right now, and I think it certainly feels like that.
Mhm. So then you mentioned reform. Do you think a threat from Farage and the far right has grown stronger or stayed similar, Emma?
I think it's grown stronger because I think people just don't know who to vote for. Until last year, I was living in London, and there was a real sense of who do you honestly vote for, because you don't want more of what's happened with the Tories. But Labour, do they have the strong leadership in order to make any change? And the changes that they've made since coming into government seem to just have affected people worse, arguably, than the Tories did.
Thank you. And Lloyd, do you think the threat from the far right has grown or stayed the same?
Absolutely, it's grown. I think the perils of a two party system mean that when both of the parties are seen to have failed, there's very little then room for people to go other than to the kind of extremes. I'm very deeply concerned about the scale of the swing towards reform. Um, and I should say not just across England and Wales, but Reform did win 17 MSPs here in Scotland, and I think we would be foolish to ignore the growth of that kind of politics in Scotland too. So I think that the test before Andy Burnham, uh, kind of on a UK level, will be how does he seek to understand the frustrations of people who put their belief in Labour to make a real change to their lives, because of course after 14 years of the Tories everything had gotten dramatically worse. Under the last couple of years of Labour, it seems that trend of decline has continued. So for him, it will be about trying to arrest that and then trying to answer some of the frustrations that people have. Here in Scotland, though, our test is going to be about how do we make sure that we lock reform out of any influence in the Scottish Parliament, which of course the First Minister and the SNP government are seeking to do, to deliver on the kind of things that people care about. But then also to set out the case for a wider spectrum of change with independence that can actually answer those fundamental issues that people have. And of course, that Westminster doesn't have a concrete answer to, like energy bills, like the cost of living, all of this, where Labour has had a real chance and a real opportunity to make the kind of lasting change, and they simply have refused to do so. So it's incumbent on all of us who don't want to see the far right get anywhere near power to actually deliver on the things that people care about. Because if people are happier, if they're satisfied, if they feel better off, then the politics of reform and the politics of the right wing will be left screaming in the void where it belongs.
Mhm. Thank you. And moving on to climate change. In a vote this week. Sorry. Um, so then, uh, not just Andy Burnham, but do you think there could be any other contenders for Prime Minister, such as Angela Rayner or anyone else, Emma?
I mean, not as far as I can see. I think it's largely a done deal at this point.
Thank you, Emma. And then, Lloyd, do you think there are any other potential contenders?
I mean, I would be surprised if nobody else does it, even just to make sure that there's a contest. I mean, I had seen on Twitter that Darren Jones had been considering it, and there were various people seeking to have a kind of Starmerite, if that's a thing, running. Um, I'm not sure the appetite is there though. I think probably we have all seen what playing out in public, a messy leadership contest it can bring, not just for the Tories. And I think probably they will be seeking to resist that, in particular because they are in government. And of course, it then distracts from the business of government. So I think those clever Labour MPs will be looking at this and going, how do we avoid a long drawn out contest that can expose all the divisions in the Labour Party, of course, of which there are plenty. But a coronation, of course, would then mean that no ideas are tested. Andy Burnham can't then set out an alternative programme and have that tested against another one. So, I mean, I don't think it's plain sailing for the Labour Party in any case, and I don't think they're a particularly happy ship at the moment. So I think it's going to be more chaos ahead, regardless.
Okay, thank you. And then, so could you please explain what Manchesterism is? It's been mentioned a few times just in the media discourse.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of broad concept, I think. I mean, I've never lived in Manchester. I've been, I think, twice in my life. And it seems to be about kind of public control and being authentic about the kind of social aspirations, say, of a government. So Andy Burnham, very, very popular in Manchester for all the reforms that he's brought in. Bringing the buses into public ownership, I think, is the most obvious one that I can think of. But also, Manchester does seem to be very successful at growing. Certainly, when I was there, I saw numerous cranes, skyscrapers getting flung up. So that seems to be a success for him in that sense. But Manchesterism as a concept is very much kind of debated, and I've seen various people having different takes on whether or not it is even actually a thing, or if it's just a very well run PR exercise. So whether or not Andy Burnham can bring any of that to the UK government, I think, is yet to be seen. Of course, the UK has for a very long time now been absolutely flatlining in terms of growth. Living standards have plummeted. So if he thinks he can arrest that, then I mean, good luck to him. But of course, the key challenge, the key driver of some of this is the fact that we're outside of the European Union, and I don't think Andy Burnham wants to get us back in the European Union, which of course would be the quickest answer to arresting some of these points of decline.
Thank you. And then, so is moving the Edinburgh TV Festival to Manchester Manchesterism?
Pass. I wouldn't consider myself to be an expert on Manchesterism. I have to say I haven't followed Andy Burnham too closely beyond when he's been in the news recently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Emma, so then do you think that the UK should rejoin the EU, and do you think a Labour government could deliver that, or if not Labour, which party do you think could deliver that outcome if it should happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the past couple of months, I've been spending my time between here and Portugal, and just the difference in standard of living is quite shocking, especially when it comes to the cost of food. Items that are in Portugal from exactly the same brands cost a third of what they do in the UK. And that's, again, I'm aware that prices in Europe are arguably rising because of people leaving the UK as a result of this frustration at how things were. But certainly the cost of things in the UK in Europe is shocking when you realise how highly certain goods are taxed, especially things like alcohol and even coffee. The difference is staggering. And yeah, I think it's a shame that, considering how closely we aligned how closely aligned the UK is with Europe, the fact that we're no longer part of it, to me, is quite shocking. But again, I think the only way really in would be through an independent Scotland, and people willing to embrace that the benefits of being part of the EU would actually lead to quite noticeable improvements in living standards for your everyday person.
Thank you. And then, do you have? Okay. And sorry about that. Moving on to climate change now. In a vote this week, the Scottish Government backed the Scottish Parliament backed the Scottish Government's commitment to a just transition and to achieve net zero by 2045 in the face of climate change denial by Reform and Tory calls to roll back the net zero timetable. Can the Scottish Government be successful when energy is reserved to Westminster? So, Emma, do you think that with reserved powers, do you think the Scottish Government could achieve just transition or net zero on time?
I think the way things are going, I think their hearts are in the right place. The intention is there, but again, they really are up against it. If Scotland was independent, I think that we would have a chance of doing it. But I think it's a shame that so much work has been done over the past 20 years, I would say, to, improve awareness of climate change. There did seem to be at one point a real push for it, certainly in the West, in Glasgow, introduction of blue bins, a real focus on it, and it all seems to have been undone by the recent technological changes. And again, with AI data centers, the insistence of using more and more power is quite ironic, really.
Thank you. And Lloyd, do you think that the government could achieve this while energy is reserved?
I think it's significantly challenging. I want to agree with Emma. I think we would have a much easier time of it if we were independent, of course, because we would be able to invest our energy wealth into the low carbon and renewable energy systems that we need. Norway, right across the water, is sat on an enormous sovereign wealth fund that it can then invest into future generations, yes. But our opportunity with that wealth would be to rapidly upscale the renewables revolution. I think the Scottish Government, that aside, does have many powers that we need to exercise over transport, over housing, increasing biodiversity. But we know that the big contributors are to do with energy. And if we do not rapidly transition our energy systems away from fossil fuels and towards renewables, then we do risk being left behind on this. Now, that doesn't mean turning the taps off overnight, because, of course, you can't do that. You would put hundreds of thousands of jobs on the scrap heap. But you've got to be able to invest in the technologies that we need, in the training, in the skills that we need. And we can't do that at the moment because we don't have those full fiscal levers or control over energy policy. So while I think that we can make great strides at the moment, I do not think that we will be able to make it completely while these poor decisions are being made by Westminster over our energy resources, and while we don't have the control and the fiscal ability to invest at the scale that we need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then, as an MSP, are you able to tell us what the targets are at this point, or the timetable? Are the targets, do you think they're suitable or sustainable? If you're able to say.
I think they're ambitious. And they are attainable. But what it requires is the Parliament, which agreed the targets, to then agree the action to meet those targets. Because Parliaments previous have been very good at setting targets and then opposing every single measure brought forward to try and meet them. And I was particularly, I should say, concerned by some of the language from Reform MSPs. Using language like climate change is a faith-based statement, denying that it's an emergency that we are facing right now, when we've just seen enormously hot days. We see wildfire happening on Calton Hill. We see droughts in my own constituency. Our drinking water reservoirs reached dangerously low levels last year. And then a few years ago, we saw the most flooding that we have seen in a generation, a once in 200-year storm. These are happening far, far, far more often than they have been. And it is related to climate change. And it is an emergency that we need to tackle right now. And that means that instead of setting targets and then sitting back and going, job done, we have to then bring forward the bold and ambitious policies required to meet them. And that means that Parliament needs to if it wants to meet these targets, it either needs to accept these proposals or bring forward alternative, credible proposals that would see the reduction in the carbon emissions that we need to see. I'm not sure we'll see that from Reform and the Tories, both of whom seem to have gone through a kind of an oil conversion to be drill baby drill, like we are seeing in the United States. We need to see a move away from fossil fuels. We need to see a move towards clean, green renewables. And that requires us to take some, yes, tough decisions, fair decisions, balanced decisions, of course, though, that mean that we don't leave communities behind and we can actually reach these targets. So it means that we need to act bold instead of just speaking bold.
Thank you. And so, Emma, a lot of this news can feel quite paralyzing and anxiety-inducing. So do you have any suggestions for what the average person could do to help with the climate crisis? Of course, the average person is not responsible for this crisis, but is there anything that they could do?
I think continue to, if you're not using it, don't use AI. And if you are, if you found yourself using it where possible, try and cut back, because obviously that, in my opinion, is the biggest threat and the biggest issue that's about to become a problem. And I don't, people have been using their brains for, since the dawn of time, but AI takes away some of that cognitive load. And it's a shame that we're being encouraged to do it, even in something as simple as Google. Google, as of, I believe it was last month, introduced a new AI search feature, which has absolutely decimated the mainstream media industry because no one's actually clicking onto websites anymore, or at least the click-through rate is significantly lower because, Google AI will simply provide you with the answer that you need. And again, it's a shame that these tools are being integrated into so many aspects of our lives without our consent, and we do find ourselves using them. I know that I'm certainly going to try and work out how to stop using Google just as a result of this.
Thank you. And then, do you find any reasons to be hopeful in the wake of this climate crisis, especially in this summer where there have been record-breaking temperatures in the UK?
For me personally, I think the best hope is the fact that we do have the technology to solve the problem. What we need is there. It's just a case of embracing it the way it should be embraced. But certainly there's nothing stopping us from making the right move towards renewable energy, especially when it comes to things like cars, solar power, etc. Like, we have the technology to do it. It's just a shame that move hasn't been made, even although I'm aware that it would be a significant investment to shift away from the old structures.
Thank you. And so, Lloyd, what pragmatic policies does the Scottish Government have to mitigate the climate crisis and reach net zero, like insulating homes, for example? What else is there?
Yeah, well, you'll see that brought forward in the programme for government. Obviously, the Heat and Buildings Bill is going to come back. We know that housing in particular is a key issue, not just in terms of carbon emissions, but also, of course, for rising energy costs. We will continue to support the instalment of clean, renewable energy, which, of course, we know Scotland is an absolute powerhouse on. We will continue to support things like the Acorn project. We will continue to support the transition, building the skills. I think there was a fund this week announced to transition workers away from oil and gas and towards renewables too. So there are pragmatic policies coming forward, recognising that, yes, we are going to need oil and gas for some time, but that we need to be making the strides towards cleaner and better power systems. I'm not going to preempt the programme for government. There will be some stuff in there related to it, and we'll see that in September.
Thank you. And then can you please explain what the Acorn project is for our viewers?
Yeah, so it's carbon capture, utilisation and storage. It is looking at how do we sequester carbon that has already been released, rather than just looking at cutting emissions. Of course, there's a little bit of debate about that in the Parliament, but it's one that the Scottish Government is very supportive of. We have been waiting for the UK Government to bring forward the funding for it. We, of course, said that we would support that. During the campaign, I went to visit a gas compressor station in Kerrymuir in my constituency, and they will be a key part of the Acorn project when it comes to fruition. The key thing for me and for the Scottish Government will be about ensuring that this remains on the UK Government's radar, because it is a significant opportunity to pioneer this technology. And of course, if we can get it right, then other countries can look at doing it too. And so I think it's important for us to continue to give it our full backing at the same time as we continue support for renewable energy, and look at providing the skills for those workers in the industry to transition to more long-term secure work in the greener energies of the future.
Thank you. And then are there any hydrogen-related policies, as there are hydrogen buses in, I believe, Dundee, so will there be an expansion of hydrogen projects?
In terms of buses, there will be better buses legislation coming forward, and of course we need to see more support for public transport. I was fortunate enough to take part in a debate related to that, which was a very good debate, and I think we reached quite a lot of consensus across the Parliament on that. In terms of hydrogen, I'm far from an expert on that technology, but I think that we need to be grasping for all different kinds of technologies here to try and get to where we need to get to. It is possible that hydrogen can provide a key part of that answer. As I say, I'm not an expert on that kind of technology, but if there is a role for hydrogen to play, then of course we should be supporting it.
Thank you. And now moving on to AI. There are growing concerns about the number of planning applications for hyperscale data centres in Scotland. This has raised questions about the environmental and economic impacts of AI and the powerful computer systems needed to process large-scale data. So, Emma, as an author, and with your previous answers, I would assume that you're very against generative AI. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I think I'm in the unusual, well, not unusual, but because of what I do, I've already been massively affected by this technology. And the truth is that when I was first asked to edit AI copy, it was 3 years ago, I wasn't that worried about it. I didn't think that its ability to do things was particularly good, but the change that's happened, especially over the past year, has been quite shocking, and the impact that it's had has been terrifying, really. Well, I don't think that people will accept AI in every aspect of their lives anytime soon. Um, it's the way that it's subtly creeping into things that's a problem, and it's just the human cost of AI is already quite significant. I think that with so many things being so expensive, people are turning to chatbots for things like therapy, for things like even legal advice, and yeah, the implications of that and what it's going to go do down the line are terrifying, really.
So then you mentioned with the Google AI mode removing clicks from normal websites, but it has also been shown that Reddit has become quite popular with answering questions. So do you think Reddit still has a chance with answering quite specific things such as legal advice, or do you think AI is going to take over that aspect as well, even further?
Again, obviously Reddit can be wrong too. I think that people need to continue to consult original sources like books, actually seek out legal advice. If they do get information from an AI, they need to double check it against more reputable sources. Um, it's just a shame that it's just become so, in my opinion, all consuming.
Mhm. Thank you. And so, Lloyd, with this hyperscale data center in Auchertool, I believe, do you think it has a chance of being approved? For example, in the United States, 50% of proposed AI data centers have either been delayed or cancelled because of public backlash. So, do you think this one in Scotland could be approved or no?
I don't know is the honest answer. I mean, I have no insight into the local planning arrangements. What I can tell you is that I'm deeply concerned, like Emma, about the flurry of these applications which seem to be coming forward. In particular, about the environmental impact, but also the demand, then the additional demand that places on energy at a time when our energy costs are already sky high. We then are looking at these enormous data centers that require so much energy to power, to then have the negative impacts that Emma has already outlined. And I'm particularly concerned about that. And actually, as the MSP for Angus South, I was encouraged when the First Minister said that he and the government were considering enhanced, strengthened guidance about AI data centres. And I have actually followed that up with a letter to the First Minister seeking more assurances on that, and also asking the government whether it might consider a pause on these data centres while that guidance is being drawn up, to ensure that all local authorities in Scotland have the same strong regulatory framework against which to assess these applications, because the environmental and the energy resilience point, I think, are particularly key. And I share a lot of the concerns that Emma has put across, and that people in my own constituency have written to me about. And certainly, I would hope that the government would consider a pause while drawing up that guidance at the very least.
Thank you. And then, so the impact of AI on jobs, for example, and compensation potentially, do you think, well, I mean, would the Scottish Government be able to compensate any workers who were made redundant because of AI? Do you think legislation could be brought in? I believe China has brought in a law that forbids firing workers in favor of artificial intelligence. So do you think the Scottish Government could do that?
Well, of course, employment law is not devolved, so there are issues with that. But certainly, I would be very supportive of further regulation of artificial intelligence. I would be very, very supportive, particularly in terms of regulation of generative AI, which I think poses a threat not just to jobs, but to a kind of wider human sense of creativity. Not to be too deeply philosophical, but I do have deep concerns about that. So I would certainly support any moves in that direction. I would certainly support and be looking to the UK government doing the same, because it's an area of economic opportunity, I suppose, but equally there are real risks that come with it. In terms of application, there are obviously medical applications that you can use AI for, and I think that where we can measure AI against a public good, we should do so. But there are real risks here, particularly in an environment where it's unregulated. And of course, you don't need to look any further than social media to see the risks associated with AI, I mean, in particular with Grok on Twitter and things like that. So further regulation certainly required before this goes any further.
Thank you. And so, Emma, with as was just mentioned by Lloyd, there are some medical applications used for AI. So then how do you think generative AI could be regulated to protect creators such as yourself, such as authors, artists, musicians? How do you think there could be controls to protect the creative industries?
Obviously, a complete ban on the use of copyrighted material, but I do think it's just the applications of it are going to be really difficult to do because, for example, as an author, I need to put my work on places like Instagram that are owned by Meta, and I'm aware that in the small print it does say that anything you put on here, even if it is your book cover, which is copyrighted, because it's being placed on Meta, technically Meta can use that to train their AI. So I don't really know how you avoid it because these companies have such a domination over the internet. And while I think it's great that there's this idea of you can't replace people with AI, I think there's a real knock-on effect. I've certainly seen within the UK media industry, a lot of people haven't been replaced by AI. It's more that AI has completely changed the way that people consume their news. As people are no longer getting it as much from social media, and especially on Google, that click-through rate has dropped and massively, affected the revenues of major publishers. It's not a direct replacing journalists with AI. It's more the old model just doesn't work anymore because of AI.
Thank you. And now moving on to the Scottish Parliament. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. There were some scheduling issues there. So then, Lloyd, do you have any other anything else to add about the potential of data centres, generative AI, or the UK government, and by extension the Scottish government's role in this potential change in technology?
I think that it's incumbent on government to make sure that technology that is being used on these islands is A, safe, and B, then is not going to pose harm. I think in terms of social media, and I just wanted to agree with the points that Emma has made, and news coverage and the way that people consume news. It's not just generative AI, but it is also the AI that powers the algorithms on social media. And in particular, I mean, you know, anytime anyone logs onto Twitter, if you've still got it, I mean, you are bombarded with all this right wing, um, and sometimes deeply damaging, racist information, and that is being driven by the political agenda of the owner. So I would say too, not just the UK government has a responsibility, but the owners of these social media sites have a responsibility to make sure that their algorithms, the AI use, is done in a responsible way. Now, where they refuse to do so, the UK government has to step in and intervene. And I think that they could be far stronger on this than they have been. We've seen the announcement of the social media ban for under 16s. That's a good thing, but that shouldn't be seen as the end of the story when it comes to tackling the harms of social media, and in particular the harms that AI has in terms of social media too. I think there needs to be much more done there.
Thank you. And so, Emma, do you think that this ban for social media for under 16s will be helpful, or do you think more needs to be done?
I think I can understand why it's been done, but I think that the problem doesn't just affect people like young children. I think in the not that distant past, you could go on social media and you would reach an end point of your feed. I think now it's just the endless scroll, and that has sort of been adopted by basically every single social media platform to the point where you could scroll your entire life away. Um, it's the way that these platforms have changed in the past. You know, you would have a certain amount of time where you'd seen all the updates from your friends. Now, when you log on to social media, it's people that you don't know, even although you've, tried to create your feed to a certain extent. And I don't really know how you get away from it apart from, you know, choosing to log out of social media at a certain point. But I'm aware that there's a real addictive quality to it, and I don't think that anything's been done about that by the platforms, because they obviously want people sitting on them for as long as possible. So, and again, I don't think that people under 16 should be denied access to the internet when it's such a fundamental part of modern life, although I understand why they've done it. But I do think if children under 16 have never really been exposed to social media, and then suddenly it's all there and suddenly it's super addictive the moment that they're old enough, that's going to be a problem too.
So then, what do you think could be done in place of a complete social media ban for under 16s?
I think education really, educating them on how these algorithms work, how it's changed in more recent years to become so addictive, and perhaps like a limited amount of time on social media rather than a complete drop in once they're old enough, especially with the fact that people, it's very common for people to make friends online, um to meet partners online, etc., etc. I just think suddenly having all of that available to you does put people at more risk, rather than having a more staggered introduction that the older generations did have with all of it.
Mhm. Thank you. And then, Lloyd, so then how do you think these social media companies could be held accountable instead of a ban? So, how could the government hold them responsible for addictive algorithms?
I mean, the government could obviously say, well, we're not going to allow your platform to run in this country unless you make various changes, and that power does rest with the UK government. It would be a very bold step, but if we want these social media giants to listen, to understand that these addictive, damaging algorithms do need to change, then you've got basically to give them an ultimatum, because otherwise they just don't care. And I think we've seen that particularly from Elon Musk. They really just they do not care as long as their platform is being consumed by as many people as possible. That is effectively the be all and end all of it. I think that also we need to take not just an approach in isolation. I think it is incumbent on any and all governments with an interest in this to work together and pressure the social media giants in that way. Because if you do it on a coordinated level, it's much harder for the social media giants to ignore.
Thank you. Now moving on to the Scottish Parliament. Sorry about the issue there earlier. So yesterday was the official opening of the 7th session of the Scottish Parliament. So then there was a debate with Reform UK, and that appeared to have caused some issues. So then, Lloyd, what are your thoughts on the Reform UK debate? Do you think it will change people's opinions of the party or improve their position within Parliament or the right-wing space?
So, the Reform UK debate on Thursday was absolutely dreadful. Not just because some of the stuff that they were saying was outrageous, but because it doesn't seem to me that they actually know what they're doing. They proposed this motion, which seems to have gone over all of these topics, and it was maybe about this long, almost as if they thought they were only going to get the one day of opposition business in the whole of the 5-year parliament. And there were various points made about that. But I don't think they appear any more credible now than they did prior to that debate, particularly given some of the quality of some of the contributions, not least from Malcolm Offord. I actually had a little bit of a bingo card, I should say, just to keep things lighthearted. I didn't quite get a full house, but I got pretty close. It's very predictable what they're going to stand up and say every single time. They're not really bringing anything new to the debate, and likewise, they're not bringing really any policy suggestions either. My take on the reform group is that there are 17 individuals. I think I would be very surprised if that group stayed at 17 by the end of the parliament. I think there are folk in there who are in there because they wanted to be members of the Scottish Parliament. And they didn't quite care how they got there. Let's not forget that Thomas Kerr a few years ago was a very liberal conservative who was, supportive of various measures on equality, and now he's standing up in the Parliament and decrying any measure to make life better for minorities and marginalised groups in society. So it's obvious that there's quite a few chancers in there, and I think that, as the First Minister said, and I came across it actually during the by-election that we had here, there are folk who voted Reform at the Holyrood election who have then seen what Reform in Holyrood is like, and they are hit by the most significant buyer's remorse that you have ever seen. The danger, though, is that those folk then go further rightwards to places like Restore, rather than accepting that the politics of the far right doesn't offer them the answers that they are looking for.
Thank you. So then, if you're able to say, what is on this bingo card you've mentioned?
Well, I had a lot. Disruption, oil and gas, targeting groups like LGBT Youth Scotland, use of the word strangers by Thomas Kerr, foxes in the hen house, all of this kind of predictable, boring attempt at culture war, when actually what people want is focus on their day-to-day lives and the things that they care about, like jobs, like energy bills, like the NHS, like the economy, like the high street, instead of standing up and using buzzwords, net stupid zero, Scotland needs reform, etc. And I should say I was only 3 squares off bingo. So, I'm bored of reform in the Parliament because they don't offer anything beyond the kind of the extreme right social media clickbait stuff. There are no substantive policies coming forward. There are no answers to the questions that people have coming forward, and people put their trust in reform because they wanted to shake up the status quo, or they wanted to see change, or whatever. But none of that is forthcoming. These people are in here cosplaying at being revolutionaries, and they're not very effective at it. And they also don't seem to have an awful lot of energy or willingness to bring forward any concrete proposals. So I would be surprised if most of them aren't terribly bored by the whole experience by the end of it, because they don't really know what they're doing.
Thank you, Lloyd. And Emma, were you following the opening of the Parliament yesterday?
I wasn't, no, unfortunately, I was working, but I can just only agree with the situation with reform, especially as someone who's written a little bit about Thomas Kerr and his social media posts. It just seems like it's power for the sake of power, appealing to people who perhaps don't interrogate their politics fully. In my experience, people who voted reform in Scotland and told me about it, people have every right to vote for who they want to vote for. But when I explained a little bit more about, what reform stands for, especially on, issues like women, for example, they were quite shocked. They did not quite realize what they were voting for because they fell into the trap of, we're going to stand up for everyday people and, scapegoating minority groups. People just, I don't think, quite realize what they are because they have no, they're just not very good at explaining what they're actually planning on doing. It's all very extreme.
Thank you. And then, so with the Scottish Parliament now open for the session, are there any policies that you're very hopeful for, or policies that you hope to see in the future, Emma?
I think just the main issue I think is a stronger regulation on AI, just because it will affect so many other things as a knock on. It will affect the far right, for example. They certainly thrive on social media. I think X has done a lot to empower people like reform. And I think obviously the environmental effects of it, which we're certainly going to see with this heat wave as it continues.
Mhm. And also, it's been increasing the price of tech with RAM, I believe, costing, you know, about 4 times what it's usually priced at. Thank you, Emma. And then Lloyd, just to finish this section off, are there any policies that you're particularly excited about or looking forward to work on in this parliamentary session?
Independence, obviously. I want to see another referendum in this parliamentary term. There is a majority for it in the parliament, and it will be incumbent on us as a parliament to agree that process with the UK government. And I hope Andy Burnham takes a more favourable view on it than others, although I'm not terribly hopeful. That's the kind of fundamental thing. That's the key that unlocks so much in terms of policy decisions, and of course the fiscal levers that we need to implement so much of it. I really agree with Emma about AI regulation. It's something that I want to see the government press with the UK government too. Any steps that we can take in the Scottish Parliament to enable that to take place, we should take. I want to touch though on public transport, because I mean I was elected deputy convener of the transport committee. This is an area of real interest for me. I think that the economic and social opportunities that can be unlocked by not just the £2 bus fare cap that we're looking to roll out nationwide, but also measures that we can take to actually strengthen regulation of buses and also make sure that
Yeah.
the bus network actually serves the people that it needs. I think that is an enormous economic and social opportunity, and I look forward to playing a small part in trying to make that a success.
Mhm. Thank you very much. And moving on to our final topic of the day, the World Cup. Scotland manager Steve Clarke has resigned. So, with the World Cup still having I think it's about 13 days left, I believe. How do you think this could turn out? Do you have any ideas of who the final teams could be? We'll start with Emma.
I mean, I think England will likely progress a little bit. I don't know whether they've got it in them to win. I just think with Scotland's involvement in the World Cup, especially listening to the radio yesterday, it was also negative, like what they didn't do. I think it's important to note that Scotland got such a big cultural boost from the whole. Especially within America, it's really portrayed Scotland in a positive light, as much as the performance wasn't, what people would want. So I think looking back on it, we should focus on the fact that they got there. They did score. There was one goal at least, and try and look back on it positively rather than focusing too much on, what didn't go well.
Yeah. I mean, there were, I think, $30,000 in donations made to local charities. The traffic cone decorations of Boston, and then causing a beer shortage. That's quite a momentous occasion for the World Cup, especially. So, yes, I think Scotland has had a good impact. So then, Lloyd, what do you think the rest of the World Cup could look like if Scotland might not have a part in it?
Well, I can tell you that my interest in the World Cup has now waned. I'm afraid since Scotland is looking unlikely to continue. I mean, I'll probably catch one or two of the matches. I might watch the final. I think, I mean, so England are a very good team. I think I agree with Emma. I think they look likely to progress. Whether or not they can win, I don't know, but they've got a lot of talent on that team. And certainly, good luck to them in terms of that. I think I do just want to touch on Emma's point about the kind of the legacy of this World Cup for Scotland. So this is the first time Scotland's men's team have been in the World Cup since I have been alive. So that in itself means that I will remember this for the rest of my life, and I know that there will be lots and lots of people who are the same. Not least, of course, the people of America who have seen firsthand the warmth, the humour, the gallousness of the Tartan Army on full display, and I think that those links that have been made between Scotland and the United States, and in particular in Boston, I think they will be long lasting, and of course, hopefully, should net us a bit of a tourism boost if folk want to go and see their Scottish friends that they've made during the World Cup. So
Yes,
we'll see.
very possible. Well, thank you very much. Now, well, that's all. That is it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you. And thank you again to our guests Lloyd Melville and Emma Grae.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.